Managing Violence Podcast, Season 5, Episode 10, with Luis Gutierrez. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Episode 10, Season 5, the Managing Violence Podcast, the very last episode of the season. Don't worry, as I mentioned a few shows ago, we will be back for Season 6 in a couple of weeks. Take a couple of weeks of downtime to finish some other projects, and then we will be back with a loaded Season 6. Every season is a little bit different. Every season's a little bit better, hopefully. But we'll be back. But before I get into today's interview, I just need to thank the latest Tribal Council member, Helder Pacheco. Helder, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Thank you very much for your contributions. Helder is going to get a bunch of perks for the contribution. Now today, my guest is Luis Gutierrez, the founder of ISR Matrix. He is a long-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Jeet Kune Do practitioner, well-rounded martial artist, but he created ISR Matrix, which I've said before on the podcast, for my money, is the best law enforcement defensive tactics system on the planet. I've trained in it fairly, I won't say extensively, but I've trained it enough to get a flavor for it, and I really think it's top-notch stuff. And given the current situation, I think a conversation around the future of law enforcement training is very topical and very important. So without further ado, here is Luis Gutierrez. Okay, I'm joined on the Managing Violence Podcast with Mr. Luis Gutierrez. Luis, thank you so much for joining us.
How you doing, Joe? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing really well, and I'm so pleased to have you on the show. Those long-term listeners will know that I'm a big fan of the Law Enforcement Defensive Tactics System, ISR Matrix, which I've mentioned on several episodes. I mentioned it way back in the very first episode of the show when I was introducing my training background and the systems that I grew up in, or I guess found most influential in my journey, and I mentioned ISR then. And I've mentioned it in several other episodes with other guests. And it's always been on my list to get Luis on the show because Luis is the founder, creator, grand guru, poobah, grandmaster of ISR Matrix. And it's just so good to have you on the show, and it's so topical at the moment as well.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So Luis, for those that don't know who you are, we'll get into the formation of ISR, but let's just talk about yourself just briefly. Can you sort of run us through a little bit about your training background, about what your origin story is?
Sure. I got into martial arts as a child. It's that classic violence finds you. I was the prototypical nerd kid in the good classes in my lunchbox and getting beat up. So moved into a not bad neighborhood, but a rougher neighborhood. So at about 5 or 6, I began the journey. And long story short, I went in and out of martial arts most of my childhood and teen years. And then by the time I got into high school and college, I took a hiatus. And then after that, returned to martial arts. My martial arts as a child and as a teen were all traditional martial arts. I experimented with different things. The martial art that I favored the most was judo, because when I had to fight as a kid, it's what came out. I'd try everything else and eventually grab the guy, throw him to the ground. And it was like really, really bad, what we call MMA now, but that's what fights began to be, you know? So, and then that went through, and then I got my confidence, your martial arts helped me, saved me as a kid that way. I didn't feel like I wanted to do it anymore. Then high school, college, you just go on with your life. And then a friend of mine was doing a JKD, which, Bruce Lee's what got me into this as a kid, like most of us my age. So he got me into the JKD concepts world, and I enjoyed it. And it was, got me into boxing for the first time. And it got me into more of the combat sports that were being said to do. A lot of guys weren't doing them, but I was actually following and trying everything. And that's where I met a lot of the guys that would end up helping me with the ISR. But my background is a very traditional martial arts. And then after that, I was there at 1992, 93 with the influx of no holds barred and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, I was fortunate enough to be in the Jeet Kune Do world. Paul Vunak was, one of the first pioneers working with the Gracies. So within that circle, I got involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the rest is history from there. Meaning, a few years after that, I met Matt Thornton, and then got involved with the Straight Blast Gym. I was the first instructor outside of Portland. So I helped them build the organization over the first few years. And my evolution there was obviously all the stuff that you're seeing now. We were doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai. I had the benefits of the organization. Matt was a training partner for Randy Couture and Dan Henderson and all those guys. So they were around. The Dirty Dozens of BJJ were in Oregon a lot. So a lot of those guys were in that area. So when we would train, they'd be there. So I had a lot of openings towards what, I think the guys that started all this. I think even in 92, 93, I was fortunate enough to be with the Carlson Gracie guys down here in Florida. So I had a head start on what's going on now, I think.
Yeah, and that's man, what a time to be alive, huh? You look back on that cool times in martial arts history, to be in the right place at the right time, to be in that
I feel
the early 90s.
I feel it's almost, I wish the guys now could have been there then, but that's just normal. But the transition from my generation, from the traditional stuff, and then the combat sports that existed that were isolated, judo, you had kickboxing, but they were all kind of separate. Us trying to put it all together, and this coming in and being the force that allowed us to, I guess, experiment and not be afraid of hurting one another and bringing others in. That evolution is something that I can't say enough of.
Yeah, it's the quantum leap in not just martial arts, but in training systems and training science, and how you mesh this stuff together, how you prepare people in a training camp to be at their maximum potential. Like, it was the first time that sports science was applied to martial arts. I mean,
it took this long.
Yeah,
it took this long. It was fought tooth and claw. I mean, the first maybe 8, 9, 10 years of this was argument after argument, and then you have to prove it, challenge matches, all sorts of craziness, just to impart just basic rational logic.
Yeah. I mean, I first got in touch with MMA here in Australia, and it would have been around about 2002, 2003. And even up until maybe 06, 07, guys were still fighting for a couple $100 if they're at the top of the card. Oftentimes they're fighting for nothing, right? So no one's employing a sports scientist. No one's paying, like, they're all paying to train. And they're fighting just because they need a reason to keep training. You're fighting for a hot dog and leftover beer dregs.
Yep. And you walk in, and the first thing they do to your fighter is check his fingernails. They check his pulse to see if he's got a heartbeat. You're good to go.
Did you bring your own gloves? Yeah, you bring BYO gloves.
Good luck if they check the tapes or not, the taping of your hand or not underneath. So yeah.
I remember when they first started demanding blood tests. I was like, wow, that seems like something that probably should have been high on the list, but that was way down the track before we started actually testing that no one had a communicable disease.
Yes, it was usually clubs, strip clubs, stuff like that. There'd be a pool of blood between the fights. They'd come in, wipe it down with some kind of towel, and then you just go to the next fight. And it was crazy.
Yeah, you're just as likely to get a staph infection from the car park or the walk to the ring as you are from actually fighting.
Among other things.
Yeah, no doubt. Anyway, moving on for that. So one of the things I find most interesting about you, I guess, as a coach, and obviously I've been a fan of your work for 10, 15 years now, is that you've concurrently trained high-level sport grapplers as well as law enforcement. And it's unusual, I think, to find someone who does both worlds well. But before we get into that, how did you get involved in training law enforcement?
So I opened up my first martial arts school. I was in my mid-20s, and I had gotten to the point where I really was enjoying this new world that was entering America, as far as, like I said, the NHB and the Gracies, and we had a big head start. So I really was passionate and excited about it. And I opened up my facility, and I had to teach children. So before we go to police, I had to teach kids. I mean, you're talking 95. So I don't want to teach karate or kung fu or anything like that. And I do want to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I want to teach it well-rounded. So I've got to get these kids to punch, kick, and wrestle. So that was a challenge in and of itself. And when I started doing that, parents started watching, had no clue. So I had to constantly define what it was like. My kids did spar full contact MMA as far as best we could back then. So it was a world of things that I had to translate, and people that I had to transform into this new paradigm. So I had a few, my instructor at the time was a police officer. He had police officers training. And then when I bought the gym from him, I was like, I want to push this, because he was kind of doing more of the JKD with them. He wasn't doing what I was doing with the kids and the teenagers. So when I took it over, I started bringing it to the adults, and those police officers wanted to train. And back then, there was a big separation between police officers and civilians. It's not like what you see now where they're all sharing. It was cops didn't train with the civilians at all. So I had to say, well, Friday after class, let's meet. Saturday mornings before class, let's meet. So a lot of what we did early on was me trying to share with them what I was learning and what I was doing, and then really trying to investigate further what it was that they did for a living as far as the laws and legalities. Now, I had been working with law enforcement for like 6 years before that, but I was following whatever the protocol of the police officer that was teaching. I was the guy that they would test a 21-foot rule with, like, Lou, here's a knife. You're gonna chase that guy. And that was me, because I wanted to learn, and I was fortunate enough to know enough police officers to see a lot of different trainers. So I already had that. But when we made that transition from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and quote unquote MMA, it was NHB at the time, nobody knew any of this. So a lot of what you see now coming from the vets coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan that want to help, a lot of what you see now with the police officers that are purple belts, blue belts, and have just gotten their black belts, that they're starting to put on like duty belts, and they're saying, all right, Joe, swing at me and let's see what we can come up with. And let me make you better. And let me help you. That's what we were doing. So, it was bruises, cracked ribs. It was things like that. Everything we can think of, we tried. The first steps were, all right, guys, show me the wrist locks, show me all the pain compliance, show me what you have. But we're going to go ahead and hit you as hard as we want. We're going to wrestle you. We're going to tackle you. We're going to bring in another person. And, everybody now listening can completely understand, but it was alien then. It failed. We got hurt mostly with the traditional techniques, not with the melee and the fun. So when we were wrestling, we were having a blast. All these guys, it was new. We had a lot of fun, like everybody that gets involved in this initially does. But our injuries came from the application of the traditional stuff while the real fight was happening. So that was the big eye opener. And I'm talking like 95 through probably 97. That was that period. So that's where I started. And as we started doing this, all of a sudden police officers started talking to one another. So I was fortunate to start having officers from different departments come in. So they would talk to each other about, well, we do it a little bit different. We do it like this, or we do it like that. And then some of them would bring in the notebooks, which were the policies of their department. And then I get the state notebooks. And I started reading this stuff. And I started realizing there's a huge gap between traditional techniques and the stuff that was coming in, but there was even a greater gap of what the states and counties and cities expected, meaning the courts, the administrators, the chiefs. There was like these huge gaps between, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you need to de-escalate, you need to escalate. All that was still there in writing. And then you had the traditional stuff that really didn't work unless you were a compliant citizen. And then you had this weird frontier stuff that was coming in. That was my world. That's where I started.
Look, I remember, so my background for context, I started off doing, I wrestled as a teenager, got into judo, got to a decent level with judo, and then started bouncing to make money while I was at university. And I remember going into my first security class to get my license so I could be a bouncer. And I remember learning the basic PPCT stuff, right? The standard come along, playing compliance stuff. And when I got out into the real world and I started trying to use it, because I'm trying to do the right thing, right? I'm a good student. I want to try and do the stuff that I learned in the classroom. And of course it doesn't work. And because I did 5 reps and waited for the instructor to say next technique, right? And then, so inevitably I reverted back to what I had thousands of hours of muscle memory doing, which was clinching up with people, grabbing them, throwing them on the ground, controlling them, which I was very fortunate about because my muscle memory was to actually clinch and throw and control as opposed to start punching people, which is what a lot of my colleagues who came from a boxing or Muay Thai background or whatever, they'd find themselves in trouble because when they panicked, it got really messy.
Yes.
When I panicked, it at least still looked controlled. But that gap between this is how it should look based on the manual, which is 3 static photos of a completely compliant subject, versus what actually works with someone who's actively resisting and trying to hurt you back.
Correct.
Completely different things. And
I don't want to take it away from the traditional guys because I have a lot of respect, and you got to put this in context because I've seen so much blowback over the years. Here's the way I look at it. Change had to come, but my instructors growing up were some badasses. They were Vietnam vets usually. They were teaching some kind of hardcore karate. I mean, shin to shin, punch to punch, trading. Those guys would fight and were completely capable. Usually back then also officers had higher standards. They were 6 foot tall minimums. All those things have also changed. But the guys I started with, they were badasses. The problem is liability, training issues, getting injured at work and stuff like that. So yeah, they can knock somebody out or slam them to the ground. And again, back then they kind of looked away from some of that when it was necessary. But the world was changing, and I had just happened to have the right timing, So a lot of the traditional stuff might have worked for those guys, but they weren't going to work for everyone, and you couldn't make it uniform.
Exactly. Actually, a good friend of mine and a former guest of the show, Jim Armstrong, he actually has a really cool approach to a lot of those traditional techniques as well, where his theory was if they never worked in the first place, they wouldn't be taught. Like at some point, we've actually forgotten how to apply it.
Yes.
And he has this cool little group of guys that train in his garage. Well, they used to anyway. All of whom are black belts in different arts, and they basically just pick a rubbish technique that they think is useless, and then they'll drill it and practice it and deconstruct it until they can figure out the way it was supposed to work and how it should have worked 100 years ago before we forgot how it was supposed to be applied. And I thought that opened my eyes to a lot of things like wrist locks. I'd written off wrist locks until Jim wrist locked me, and I was like, oh, that worked. Wow, okay, cool. And now wrist locks are obviously flavor of the month for anyone who's not very good at jiu-jitsu but likes to tap people out cheaply sometimes. But coming back into your story, so how did ISR come about? So you train jiu-jitsu, jeet kune do, you're training some law enforcement guys. What's the origin of ISR?
Okay, so what's happening is I start getting popular locally. I mean, I might have been at the time one of the only people doing it. So meaning in Florida, there wasn't a lot of people doing what I was doing at all, meaning to civilians or police. It was new. So they started saying, you need to teach. And so here I am all of a sudden from my facility where we're doing, around training hours, we're working with police officers. I start putting together, okay, what's a course look like? What's a weekend fully of police officers along with new guys coming in? What's that going to be like? So I have to create a curriculum. I got to create an outline. And I got to do things that I would do for my regular school. And I had a lot of help from the police officers, but I put stuff together. So the guys that were there early on, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, they're still with the ISR. Those guys helped me put the curriculum and saw the development. But when I first started teaching, it was a blend of what they wanted to see that was in their manuals, along with check this out. Because things like the cover, that we had back then, that was the helmet later on. We were playing with that stuff, but we didn't have names for it. I didn't have all that put together. So the first courses were more intros where I was introducing NHB, BJJ to them, but then we'd go back to the wrist locks. There was like a merger. And then I started realizing that what I needed was what I had and I was developing for my martial arts. I'm very much into game theory and systems theories. I like to teach conceptually. I like to teach specifically to the individual, never to the entire group. The group to me is the context. Is it kids? Is it cops? What is it? What's the context? What's our aim? Let's do this. But I try to create stuff that works for the individual. If I have to teach my style or teach the art, I think that there's a disconnect. So I make sure that if you're there and you're working repetitions or doing drills and you're not doing something correct, I adjust you. And if I constantly have to do that to enough people, there's something wrong with me. The system's wrong. So I adjust the system again until it works for the vast majority of individuals in the class. So how far back can I push the technique to a concept where everybody builds, like the rough strokes of a painting. When you first start, you kind of like lay it out loose. Then from that systematic approach, I'll start tightening and tightening and tightening, but it's all done in systems. So that's where the phases began. The phases started saying, okay, well, what are officers trying to do? So, they would teach me, well, Lou, if you're driving on the highway and everybody's speeding and a police car kind of enters that amount of cars, everybody slows down all of a sudden. The law is there. So they've established presence, and that's enough to control them. And then if nobody speeds, they're stabilized. The cars are kind of moving at the speed limit. And if everything's cool, the cop drives off, it's been resolved. That was it. But those same stages existed everywhere for police. They get to a scene, there's presence, they have to stabilize the situation. Somewhere along, it gets resolved. As we move towards violence, I realized that's where it gets complicated, and that's where they lose it. On the manuals, that presence, that middle ground, and that final ground is easy. If it's you and me and we're drunk and we got in a fight, you and I are good guys. The cops come, we kind of mouth off a little bit, but we get manipulated with the wrist locks. We're like, all right. They move on. But what about the guy that fights back? What about the guy that doesn't want to go? So that's where the terminology started to get very strict. The techniques got to get very strict and everything else. So long story short, I've been doing this for a few years. I'm in the SBG. One of my training partners in that Jake AD period that I talked about was Paul Sharp. A lot of guys know Paul Sharp. So he's the only guy that I know that gets it from the level that I'm at right now, because at the time, I've got a decent ground game. I got a decent, well-rounded game. And he's, at that point, a police officer. So we were training partners before. He left a couple of years, I think a year or two, and he left Florida, and then he became a police officer. I was still training. I was teaching cops. He's actually a cop. I'm getting offered a scholarship to be a police officer, full pay while I'm in the academy and out. But I'm running my gym, and I'm having so much fun, and I'm doing this, and I'm like, pick and choose. I rode around with police officers at the time, and I started respecting what they do live, because the police chief that wanted to hire me basically took me to all the bad neighborhoods that I'd be working. So I looked at that, and I saw what they were doing, and I was hanging out with cops doing their jobs, and I'm like going, I'm teaching kids, I'm teaching women, I'm teaching adults, I've got a competition team, I am teaching police officers. I think I'll stick with this. And so I call Paul, we have a laugh about it, but he's game for it. All I had was the idea of an ISR matrix, because I like matrices. I had the intercept, stabilize, resolve, and I talked to him about, that's the system that I want to develop. Would he like to be a part of it? Would he like to help me with it? And I said, we're going to film it. And we had no plan. We had no idea other than one phone call. Sure, Lou, because that's Paul. He was, that's who we were. He flies down, stays at my house. Friday night, we talk for about an hour, but we're distracted because we want to go get margaritas, and we're just having fun. And the next day, we have no idea what we're doing. And in 2 days, we shot everything that was that VHS set.
Wow.
So the reason I'm mentioning it like that is because I'll backpedal and explain what happened, but that's what it was. Hey, Paul, I got this idea. It's called the ISR Matrix. We go through these stages. I have an idea of making it really simple. If we can think of 3 techniques for intercept, 3 techniques for stabilize, and 3 techniques for resolve, and we can kind of make it work together, we'll have something that's better than what's out there, because there's nothing. And he's like, cool. We get there. The next day we show up and we start messing with it. My wife's filming it all in my studio, and it's pretty clear that we're on the same page. We probably did maybe 20 techniques that are not on that VHS set that we deleted, that we said, no. And it's not that they didn't work. It was more style. He and I approach things from a different angle. Anybody that trains with both of us would get a great benefit of those 2 sides. We see things very much alike as far as what's necessary, the aim and the context. We approach it a little differently. So the stuff I threw out was the stuff that only would be something that I would do or only he would do.
Sure.
So we took that out and we agreed on these things. And that began the ISR. From there, since we were in the SBG, we spent the next 3 or 4 years introducing it to people. Most of it was backlash from the police departments all over America at the time. And then the celebrity personalities that were teaching at the time. It's too rough. You're going to get people hurt. You guys are jocks. Not everybody's got your skill set. Not everybody's got your mindset. it's not going to work. And he and I fought that forever, mostly online. And then anybody that showed up, we did our best to introduce them to what we did. Those that came to our courses were an easy sell because you could see it. We would demonstrate the techniques and you could see it. But this wasn't a system we were teaching. It was an introduction to that this is a possibility. These are worlds that can merge. Check this out. Check this out. This is why this works. I think we did like 2-hour clinics, 1-hour clinics, and maybe a 4-hour course at the time. And that was the birth of what people saw online with the ISR. He and I never trained together. We never really built it apart from that. That was the origins. That's the start of it.
Man, I remember coming across that short, low-resolution clip, maybe I want to say about 2006 or so. There's like a 2-minute video set to some rock and roll. It had, I think Paul was doing some crazy monkey boxing in a hallway, and people just getting after it. And I remember looking at that. I was a young bouncer who'd done a bunch of courses at that point, trying to find some defensive tactics that I thought would actually work. And I remember looking at that clip going, this is the most badass training I've ever seen. Like, I want to do this.
Yeah. That was 2000. That was 1999. And then we introduced it in 2000 to the SBG. And then that went on to about 2004 with the little courses. He was back home in Chicago at the time. We can talk about it some other time, but everybody knows the amazing individual he is. He was doing the same thing I was doing as far as we're very similar. He goes pure obsession. He gets in there and gets the most out of everything. I was doing the same thing. He was doing it. The ISR that he and I had come up with, those 9 techniques, he was teaching that within his department to his friends and people that I'm not aware of. And he was teaching it to a SWAT team, he told me later on. I was starting to run the courses based on this. So we were both developing what we had put together that weekend on our own. We would meet for the SBG, but we'd always go back to the 9 techniques. We'd never go back to what we were doing. But what we did share that we constantly talked about was the excitement in the air. The people that were with us knew there was something happening. There was some evolutionary break. Something was happening. We were having too much fun. We weren't really getting hurt. If we got hurt, it was our fault. We're like, all right, go ahead, hit me there, and we'll go from there. Like, let me take a shot and then go, or whatever, Yeah. But we give a lot of feedback at the camps, and we were really excited. And I think what's missing now is, for the new guys that are listening to this, there's about a 10-year period from 2000 to 2010 that a lot of what you're seeing people do now, there's a wealth of information in that period from a lot of individuals that trained with us then. He had his own circle of really close friends that ended up teaching this stuff. And so did I. And they're out there. We can get into names later on. But that's the people we impacted. And that's the stuff that ended up teaching the people that started teaching in 2010, 2012 that are getting involved in this. So if they can look up these individuals, I think it'll accelerate their own growth as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel. A lot of the stuff that you see now, there's about 12 people that were around back then that never stopped training, that took those initial 9 techniques and went their own way. So what I see when I look online now is those 9 techniques essentially being taught a zillion different ways by people that have been influenced from that original core. What I did was at some point, he and I had to decide what was happening. It was mostly on my end. If you don't mind, I'll continue with the journey unless you have questions.
Okay.
By about 2004, 2005, I was teaching courses pretty much every month. And these are 20 to 30 police officers running through what looked very much like what you see today. It was the core ISR as I saw it. And as I started doing that, I had people come to the courses who I thought were police officers or federal police officers that were military guys. And they were being sent to just review and see what this was about. And then I've got an invitation to go to Lackland Air Force Base, and we can get into that too, to introduce the ISR to them. So when I did that, I thought I knew nothing. After that first course, I felt like I couldn't contribute anything. I was useless because these guys were coming back with marks on their neck from the brass. They had that 1,000-yard stare. These are special teams. These aren't guys that are there for a year at a time. These are guys that go and come back and go and come back, different mindsets. And I was there, Mr. Martial Artist, you know, but I got the highest reviews. They loved it. They asked me back. I got contracted to keep coming back, and it changed everything. I had to go back home and really solidify it all and really push the training protocols. It's called Paul. It was hard to go back and forth. We were growing up. We were buying houses, marriage, kids, life. He was going, and I think it's already out there. He was going deep cover. He was going, he's just an amazing individual. And we couldn't talk about it back then, but he says, like, go, I'll do my thing. I'll do your thing. So that ended that relationship on that aspect. And then I just ran with the ISR. So the ISR at 2004, 2005 became what everybody's seeing now. It became something that I had for police officers, and then I jumped it towards special teams. And it went from a purely apprehension system to evasion, which is survival. So it started getting more combative, and that was like the full circle of ISR. So we had to separate it into ISR physical management for civilians and security. We had to do ISR LE for police officers, and we had to do ISR armed forces, because I started realizing they have different manuals, quote unquote, that we have to cater that system to. Going back to what you said earlier, context is everything. So the system then broke into 3, and the rest is history. I mean, I'll answer any specific questions. I can talk about it forever, but I don't think people recognize that what separates the ISR from, you know, it's not jiu-jitsu for cops or wrestling for cops or anything like that, is everything we do is something you can write a report to that fits manuals, that it's specific for that use. We don't waste anything. Everything's tight around that use. I don't go into a department or to a course and teach police officers Brazilian jiu-jitsu or wrestling. That won't work for a million different reasons. I go there and I teach a specific system that I can teach their guys, that they can then teach themselves and progress from there. So now it's even easier, because you go to these locations and you have the purple, browns, and black belts there already. So the best compliment that I get is, I was trying to reinvent the wheel. Thanks. This is what I need. And then they can teach it. I think that's the biggest misconception, is that, for example, what's going on now, everybody needs jiu-jitsu. Get jiu-jitsu in the cop. Let's modernize the systems. That's 1999. Actually, that's 1995 for me.
I mean, I really wanted to ask you that question, because it's such a common refrain. I mean, I'm part of the BJJ community. I'm part of all the groups on social media, and this common line that keeps getting thrown out: if all cops were at least purple belts, we wouldn't have any problems. And I'm like, yeah, it's different though, you know.
Can I ramble on this? Because I'll go on this.
Look, I've got no credibility to have an opinion on this. You've been a black belt for like 20 years, right? You can talk about this as much as you like.
Okay, cool. Here's the thing, and I think by discussing this subject, because I get very nervous and uncomfortable about talking about martial arts and then jumping into ISR, because that's a 20-year thing for me of evolving it towards it being 2 different things. So it's easier for me to talk about it this way, to bring both worlds together. So when we all started BJJ, whether you're starting right now, or us, the old guys that started 92, 93, man, you know, every coach you went to taught it differently. Every coach. Some schools you'd get killed, go home, and your neck's all hurt. Other schools, you had a great time and you learned a lot. Some schools you learned to, and you went to, and you don't know if they were keeping techniques from you or the coach didn't know it, and the other guy gave you too much and you're brain farting in the middle of the match. So every coach is different, and that hasn't changed to this day. You know, especially now where everyone knows BJJ, meaning, so now it goes back to what camp you're with, you know, what team you're with, and more than that, what coach you're with specifically. So I can understand back then, jiu-jitsu was this thing that was universally new to everyone, but we're at a stage now where it really boils down to who is your coach to see your expression of BJJ, because it's different than the other guy's expression. So imagine teaching that to an industry that everyone's got to do it the exact same way for testing, for certification, and for it to match, you know, legally and moral parameters. So what people don't understand is when you say everybody needs jiu-jitsu, if you had departments where everybody was a purple belt, yeah, of course. But how are you going to do that? You got, how many thousands upon thousands of police departments in a country like mine? So
And,
you
and 80% of the people that work there don't want to train. How do you give someone a purple belt who doesn't want to train?
Well, 80% don't want to train. Some are over 40 already. And you know that, and no one wants to talk about this. When you're over 35, if you're new to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and your coach doesn't have a depth of wisdom on how to teach it, you're going to get jacked up and quit. The thing is, when I started, we stuck through it because it was this new thing and it had all these qualities. The guys right now will tell you, most people drop by blue belt if they make it. It's not the same world anymore. Plus, there's a recognition that anything past purple belt is for jiu-jitsu guys. A blue belt is what you need for self-defense. It really is. The Gracies were spot on. Maybe a purple belt. Beyond that, you're training specifically to beat other purple belts, brown belts, and black belts. It's a specific game. If I got into a situation right now, I'm not using quote unquote black belt techniques, brown belt techniques, purple belt techniques, using blue belt techniques or white belt techniques done at a black belt level. That's what people don't understand, that purple belt, brown belt, and black belt don't mean anything for anybody unless you're in the BJJ. Then there's a specific system. So going back to what I'm saying, imagine saying, all right, we're going to create a universal system for BJJ. Arm bars. Why do arm bars? But there's going to be that guy that's teaching arm bars. There's going to be the guy teaching variations of chokes that I know are going to cause neck cranks when the guy fights. Well, why do you know that? Because I got 20 years of watching it go wrong. Mm-hmm. So if you look at a jiu-jitsu coach that's maybe 60, 70 years old now, really old guy, they're going to coach different than a 20-some-year-old. So we have that, just that alone. So you talk about thousands upon thousands of departments. Who's going to teach what now? What is this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu you're talking about? Because there's so many different expressions. Then I hear these guys in my head going, no, Lou, there's certain fundamentals we got to teach across the board. But you're going to have an argument about that too. Mm-hmm. What is that fundamental quality that you have to impart to everybody? So we're just talking technique now. We'll get into lawsuits and workman's comp and, oh, my fingernail's torn. I can't train for 3 weeks now. And the chief's upset because now he's got all these cops sidelined when they're not, are they hurt? Are they not hurt? So a universal system can't be just brought on by random instructors teaching all over the world. They're going to have to go back to what I had to go through, which is, how do I get this across to the police administrators first? How do I get this across that everyone's going to want to do it? That you can teach this in department every year to some degree. So what I started with was we call a vertical core, was the clinch material, the standing material, because that's easily, anybody who's a DT trainer can teach our vertical core in any department in the world. We've proven that for 20 years. I'm talking Asia, Europe, North America, South America. We've done that. If we're talking ground now, because that's the new thing that's being discussed, it's sorely needed. But to say that it's something that can be brought on just saying teach jiu-jitsu at your academies, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. We spent the longest time putting together our ground core, our horizontal core. That took forever. And we had 6 black belts in the company from different organizations saying, whoa, this is going to take forever to do. And we had discussions about it, and none of us thought that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was good for police officers in and of itself. We understood that just like the vertical core, we had to come up with something specific for police officers in that realm. So a plug for my company, but we have it. It took us the longest to do. All of us got together. We had about probably, I'd say 60% of it done. And then our president, Ray Price, finalized it, put it together. All of us black belts approved it, and he's teaching it now. And he's only run like 3 courses. That to me is 2000 again. It's 1999, 2000. If anybody attends that course and they're a raw beginner to BJJ, or they have a black belt, they're going to say the same things that my Greco college friends said when they were police officers and coming in to the ISR vertical core. They're going to say, thanks, you saved us a lot of trouble. I can see why you don't do this. I can see why you don't do that. I can see why you don't turn this way. I can see why you don't put your hip this direction because of the holster. All of that we've done. They would have to do that in each and every department with a different instructor. So when it would come back to the courts, you're going to have just two departments in the same city doing things differently. There's no way around it. And our methodology from the start incorporates everything that's in those manuals that every department does share, which is uniform. So that's my whole rant on this. If the ISR Matrix is anything, it's a teaching and training method, first and foremost. So it's systematic. It teaches you to layer. It teaches you to pace your lessons. It's meant for instructors. What I did was create a system meant for instructors. I'm not a badass. I was always the second best. I've never been a champion. I just had enough skill to make the team. That's it. So I looked at things more from a coach. I've always been a coach and instructor. That's my forte. So these guys that are out there saying jiu-jitsu for everybody, yes, that's the right intent. But as somebody who's got a gift or a blessing for this, they have to start looking at it a little differently. They have to start looking at it from a less about them, because let's be honest, all of those guys can go make money now, and all those guys can have jobs, and they're going to help the survivability of these officers. Each and all these guys' heart is in the right place. Any police officer they teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to, any and all will get some benefits for their personal survivability. I believe in that. That's what we had from 95 to the year 2000. That's what I had. Every police officer that trained with me, we were just fighting and getting a little bit better. Everybody increased their odds out there on the street, but we didn't have a uniform system that we could teach every culture, every ethnicity, every department, all the nonsense that gets taught as far as administrators, we were able to do. And that is, I think, that's what's necessary, not an art. You don't need to teach an art or a system just because you think you're going to help 5 guys. How about helping the entire industry?
Yeah, that's so powerful what you just said. The one thing that I heard you say, it has to be less about you. It's less about you as an individual, and it's hard. I mean, like for me, like people that love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and I love grappling. I want everybody to learn how to grapple, so I've got more people to grapple with, right? If I'm working if I'm working as a police officer, I want my colleagues to know how to grapple because, hey, I might get paid to train during the day, which would be fantastic. If nothing else, I feel like they're probably a little bit more capable to back me up, which is great. You know, like I find that jiu-jitsu people are a lot like born again Christians. You're like, once you've found Jesus, you need to tell everybody about Jesus, right?
Yes.
Which is cool, right? But it doesn't change everything. It needs to be nuanced. It has to be people like you who've put 20 years into developing this into a system that can scale, as opposed to what you're suggesting, which is a whole bunch of well-meaning people that haven't put that amount of research into what they're doing and just want to help individuals, right? There's so much that needs to happen, especially in the US with the number of departments you have, the different standards you have, the different recruitment that you have. It's a complex beast to try and standardize.
God bless it, because it's given me the ability to do what I've done. Because when we were in China for 5 years, when something is so straight up uniform across the board, in one sense, it's easier to deliver it, which it was for us to deliver there because it's so standardized. But in America, it really put it on me to really keep reiterating and cleaning up that painting I talked about, that I started off really rough and detailing because everybody wants a little bit different. So I had to find that common ground. Going back to what you said about jiu-jitsu and born again flavor of it. The thing is, and I've got some badass instructors that's come from hardcore karate. Those guys are just beasts. But the thing is, they're limited. Their toolbox. I'd rather be arrested by you when you were a wrestler, just a wrestler, because if I'm not fighting back too hard, you're going to muffle me up and tie me up and put me down. But my friends that do Shioshin Kai and all that stuff, they're going to break something on me. They're going to take my jaw off or put their fist through my ribs. No, I'd rather take the wrestler. Even though the wrestler, if he escalates, can, bury me, it's a different thing. So I don't think wrestling and grappling is the answer for police officers for a lot of reasons. When they get to a scene, there's always a lot of people. And you see the amount of respect police officers get, not much. They're in major danger now if they're on the ground, their weapons on the ground and everything else. I just agree with all the grapplers out there, and that's my favorite. I'm a grappler. So I agree that when it hits the fan, you need, that's something you can go to that most people are not aware of. When it comes to arresting and controlling, those are the arts that do just that. When you were winning at wrestling, you were controlling and arresting that opponent by getting those points and that pin a certain way. So I don't believe striking or clinching or grappling for cops. I don't believe in MMA for cops. I believe in a system for cops, by cops, designed by cops. For 20 years, I was the only civilian in my system on purpose. I did that on purpose. We're just now switching over to a civilian approach as well. So.
Yeah, what's your take? I mean, this is a big diversion, I guess, but I think a natural evolution in our conversation, based on the circumstances. When we're recording this in late June 2020. If you happen to be listening to this in the future, if you are in the future, please let us know how this turns out, because it's anyone's guess at this point. But there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment with law enforcement in the US. Regardless of, without getting into the politics of everything, there is obviously some training issues that are resulting in deaths in custody. It's not just in the US, it happens all over the world. It's become quite political, which is certainly a topic for another day. But in terms of addressing those training needs, in terms of safe restraint, safe custody, do you have thoughts on how that needs to happen in the future?
So that's a good question. That's 1995, because the same things were happening with the traditional techniques. Same thing.
Yep.
In fact, the neck restraints and all that stuff. You'll have a bunch of police officers swearing how it saved their lives and other people's lives, and you have that one officer that held it too long because a bunch of people were yelling at him, and he didn't realize he was holding it too long on somebody, and they die on in his arms, literally. So I think the dialogue that's necessary gets clouded by the people that are responsible for the liability and the legal side of things on one end, if I may, and then the police officer that's on the front line. This happens in military. This happens on all levels. If you got the immune system of the organism up front, feeling what's coming in, and then you've got way back in the back is the part that wants to think it and sort it out and plan it out. So the immediacy and the pressures are there from the frontline police officers. The guy way back, he either hasn't trained much in years because he's older, or he never went through that. He's more the pencil pusher. The guy that gets the things, the guy that pays for the courses is what we always say. The hardest part starting this off was those guys don't train. This is early on, 95 through like 2010. Those guys didn't train much. So what happened is they watch a video or they look at a magazine and they see some really, really fancy kung fu-y kind of moves, and they want to hire those guys in. And then the frontline guys are like, no, bring in, this famous UFC fighter. Those are the worlds I lived in from 95 to 2010. So you'd either have Hoist Gracie coming into a course and tapping out 80 guys back to back. So all the cops are like, oh my God, it couldn't do anything with them. And then, they take a picture with them going, awesome, stud. And then I'd ask them, so what you learn?
Don't go to arrest Hoist.
Yeah, but he's awesome. And then you get the other guys on the other side that go to the kung fu guy going, oh my God, that guy's like a Bruce Lee. He moves like Jackie Chan. What did you learn? Well, and then from both groups, you got the guys that are going to try it out. And that's just a disaster on both ends. So what's going on in America now, what you're seeing is, unfortunately, police officers doing what they're told in the manual. So they're following loosely what the manual says with a tactic that doesn't quite fit the manual. And that disconnect makes it so the public is really upset at what they see. Trust me, the officer's not happy. He's getting sued and everything else. So in the end, he's not happy about it. The chief of police isn't happy. The newspapers aren't happy. The mayors aren't happy. Yet no one's done anything wrong. They're doing the best they can. And it's madness, because your anger is justified on either side of this. And I look at it as, oh my God, it's just chaos. So I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to get into what side, but we've all had a knee on our neck for long periods of time and been all right with it. We've all been choked out from somebody putting a choke on our neck. And we've dealt with it in a safe environment where we're doing specifically that. But we've seen it go wrong in realms where people don't understand any of it because of panic, because of other things that are going on. So even from looking at this, if I was to put a rear naked choke on anybody, a lateral neck restraint on somebody, you couldn't tell me you weren't breathing. You couldn't be, Lewis, I can't breathe when I'm choking you out. You couldn't be saying that. So even from a jiu-jitsu perspective, when I watch the thing that just happened, I have to ask myself, how much can't he breathe? Because he wouldn't be able to talk. So what else is going on there? Is his heart giving out? So that's what the legal side's looking at now. So again, not trying to get political. When this goes to court, you're going to have people arguing these things, and it's politicized. So it's really heated. You're going to have people coming in that are the people that are experts, quote unquote, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu saying, I'm a defense expert. This is what I do. He couldn't be saying I can't breathe if he can't breathe. And then you're going to have the other side saying, yeah, but this is what we're seeing on video. And the general public wants to know what happened and why this extended, because it was unnecessary, this extended unnecessary abuse is happening. Because I take both sides. That was not necessary. And on the other side, that's not exactly what happened. So I see both sides. Again, I always go back to the work hasn't been done anywhere else. I still don't quite get it. It's said to me at least once a week in my life, I really was ahead of the curve. I am a mad scientist. I did it because it was a challenge. I was in the best organization, I think, in the world, which is the SBG, as far as looking at things from a conceptual and intellectual perspective, breaking it down. And there was no cop program, and they weren't going to go there because it was, the whole point was the revolution of sport. And there was no kids program because what the hell to do with a 5-year-old in a rear naked choke? So I went there. I said, what can I contribute? Because Matt and I were building this together. I said, what can I contribute? So I said, I'm going to focus on police, which is what I've been doing. And I'm going to focus on kids, which is what I've been doing that nobody else is touching upon. So what you're seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is a big disconnect between law enforcement, which vast majority are really good people with a job they have to do, and then civilians who have no idea what their job entails, and then the courts, which have specific things they need to do, and then the media that wants just a lot of attention to make money, and they're going to just ratchet this thing up over and over and over. But I was there in 1980 riots, all the way up. There's been many riots before this, and I was there listening to both sides. I grew up, my whole thing with martial arts is I grew up fighting. Most of my friends that I grew up with are dead or they went to jail for violence. I chose this side of the line, so I wanted to help people. So if they do not create a universal system that both civilians and police have some kind of understanding, it's not going to work for the courts. It's not going to work for the administrators. So if somebody saw someone getting arrested using the ISR that you guys know, that you guys have watched for the last 20 years, which is our vertical core, I think everybody would agree that the arrest, whether it's down here or escalates to survivability, the officer would always look like he's doing what he needs to do to respond accordingly to the subject escalating that fight. Because the officer only has a limited amount of techniques, 9, and then everything else is based around training to get to those positions, to apply those techniques, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And we have it down in manuals, we have it down in cases, so we have it. Anybody that would watch that visually would say, damn, I didn't want to see that, but I can't really argue. The guy kept escalating, the cops adjusted accordingly. If they saw our ground program, they would see the same thing. So what I'm trying to say is the public's never going to be happy, ever. Meaning they're always going to see like, why you become violent? Why did you have to do that? But that public is also going to say, well, they're going to debate among themselves and they're going to, what else could he have done? Well, he didn't sit on his neck for fucking 9 minutes. And he didn't beat him with a flashlight, which was the 70s and the 60s and the 50s, because he didn't know any better. And he didn't shoot him because he could have done something else. So they're going to see the cop trying to talk to them. They're going to see them trying to engage. Then they're going to see the cop having no choice but to engage. Then they're going to see the cop trying to wrestle him first. Then they're going to see the cop getting hit. Then they're going to see the cop trying to wrestle with hits. Then they're going to see the person reaching for the weapon. Then they're going to see the police officer retaining his weapon at first, not pulling it, and continuing on with the arrest with punches and wrestles. Then they're going to see the weapon coming out almost, and the cop taking the weapon so it can't come out, and either finishing it or getting to his weapon, shooting the subject. So it applies to an escalated use of force that if the subject ever stopped, the police officer could then de-escalate. Now, if the police officer doesn't de-escalate and the person has, then that makes the administrators happy, because now in court, they can, this is horrible to say, but this is the truth, and every officer knows it, they can lay it at the feet of the officer. You could have de-escalated using this system. You were here, here, and here, and you didn't escalate. You took it to this technique, because we have tactics that can hurt somebody, and it's your fault. So when I get called as an expert witness, which I have been, it's pretty easy to say, did you use this? How did you use it? When did you use it? And then there's a debate between both sides, and law is established. A decision is made that over and over, the majority of the public is happy. The majority of the law enforcement is happy. And that's all we can ever hope for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really well said, man. There's so much there. And like, I mean, it is a big topic. It's something that, as you said, I mean, the restraint-related deaths in custody has been a thing since, well, basically since the formation of any kind of police force. It's always happened.
Yes.
And it sort of seems cyclical as to whether it's a media attention season at the moment. I think COVID was burning out a little bit, but anyway, I think there's so much value in what you've created with ISR because of the systemized nature. I can still vividly remember, and I did my first ISR course 12 years ago. I can still vividly remember the sequence of what to do with different levels of resistance. He resists this way, I go to this technique. He resists that way, I go to that technique. If I want to keep him up, I do this. If I want to put him down, I do this. And everything was so easy to escalate and de-escalate. And that's just vertical core. And that was just the physical management. I was fortunate to do the LE course as well. But the ability to be able to escalate and de-escalate along a system without having to improvise a solution, I think is so valuable. I mean, as martial artists, the last thing you want is a white belt making up a technique, right? Because they think they're doing the right thing, but they don't have the 15 years of knowledge that tells them why that was a bad idea and why no one else does it that way. And I think that's sometimes what we see with police when they don't have confidence in their techniques that they've been shown. They have to make something up because they've got nothing else. Or they escalate to the level of force they are comfortable with, which might be drawing a tool, it might be going to a firearm, because they have no confidence in that intermediate skill of hand-to-hand. And what I've found from my own anecdotal experience is that the officers or security guards or bouncers, whoever that I've been training, that have more confidence in their physical skills tend to be better talkers as well, because they are willing to give the person more chance to de-escalate verbally before they go hands-on, because they know if it does escalate, they'll be fine. I can manage the situation. They're not panicking about getting hurt because they know they're okay. And I think that's the same thing. If you don't have confidence in that intermediate level of force, of being able to go hands-on and control a situation, you are either going to not talk enough because you're going to escalate too quickly, or you're going to escalate way too quickly and end up in a lethal force or grievous bodily harm situation because you went to a tool where it wasn't necessary.
Very well said. That's spot on. The thing, what you had guests on both sides, so you'll get the guys that are more physical, which we all were at the beginning because it was missing, and then you're going to get the guys that are more cerebral. They're going to talk about mindsets and the psychology and staying calm, and they're going to create systems that are more psychological based that offer the officer as much as possible the sense of staying calm. But you know what? When you get punched in the face and things change and there's a group around you and you don't know if they're going to engage also, and you're in that tunnel, you need the physical side as well. The missing link is always the system that puts it together. None of that exists in isolation, you know. Every department in the past has those go-to guys when the shit hits the fan that they call to, that will tie people up and do what they have to do. And they'll have the other people that they put in front of the camera. Every department has those extremes, but that's, you know, less than 1%. The majority of the cops are doing exactly what you said. It's like, I did my best to talk. They surrounded me. They started hitting me. I'm going home alive that day, and I don't blame them. You know, so then you get those situations, and I've been around this a while. I see both sides. There's bad apples in everything. When this started out, I disagreed with it, but there was a lot of nobility being thrown the way of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts or any black belt. I don't care if you get a black belt. It has nothing to do with your character as a person. It's just a bunch of bad apples on that side too. So I don't believe that you're going to get rid of any of those people, but I do believe that if you make the system uniform and everybody's accountable to that system, those bad apples will immediately be able to be laser pointed to, and everybody will know exactly who they are, and they will show what they are, and then the courts can handle those guys, because nobody likes those guys. They mess it up for everyone, civilians and police alike,
Yeah, actually, you just reminded me of something I learned from an old karate instructor of mine when I was a kid, and I was talking to him later on as an adult, and I'd moved beyond the traditional training and we're doing more MMA style training at the time. And I was talking to him about, traditional karate class, everyone lines up at like the same interval, right? Like there's an equal amount of space between each line. And then it's like you're exactly like 2.5 steps behind for the line behind that. It's very military. And I remember saying to him, like, why do you do that? Like, why don't you just do it in a semicircle or randomly spaced around the mat the way that we do it? And he said, because I'm one instructor with sometimes 30 kids, and if everybody is lined up and they're all doing the same technique at the exact same cadence, I can see if someone's doing it wrong. And
yes, I took a lot from them for that reason. Yeah,
I was like,
there's a way to bring that in.
That applies so much to life. I mean, if you have a standardized system, anyone who deviates from that system immediately is noticeable. Whereas if you have a system where people can kind of do their own thing, it's like gear, right? If everyone's wearing the same gear, you can tell if someone's bringing something in that wasn't authorized. If everyone's allowed to bring their own gear in, trying to regulate it is a nightmare.
Yes, and that's super important, and I missed that. So thanks for bringing that up. The thing with the ISR, and I've done it, I can teach one guy, or I can be like I have been overseas where I've got 150 people, and I've only got like one person. In fact, David Pauly here from Australia, he's helped me in those situations. So I need a system where I can break these guys into groups, line them all up, teach it, and then break them into groups where it was so easy to translate it over that now they can transform it within their own little groups, and I can just walk around and see exactly what's happening, and I can line them all back up and do it again. So the ISR uses both traditional and modern approaches to get what it needs to get done, because I'm not looking at it as traditional or modern. I'm thinking, what systems did they have in place here and why, and what systems do they have in place here and why? And therefore, what's my context, what's my aim? And I'm bringing those two systems together like a dialectic to try to create something better, something that utilizes both. So yes, valid point. A lot of the new guys, and that's one of the things we talked about, you can't bring jiu-jitsu to everybody, because even teaching jiu-jitsu alone, if you don't have a point A to point B to point C, and then you miss B, so you know that, so you go back. And then if this person doesn't that, you can take them out of that group and put them in the B group, and they can just work on the B portion. And if this person moved on, he can go to the D portion. I can do that in an entire class, keep everybody happy. If somebody's injured, I can go stick with the C group, because they're just going to stay with this technique. That way, if a department we have these guys injured, but we'd like them to attend so they can get some, okay, don't worry, I can work with those guys too. Nobody sits out at an ISR course. Nobody. No matter what age you've got or anything else. You can't do that with, all right, let's do jiu-jitsu. In fact, that's the problem. If you come learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from me, purely Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from me, I can teach it the same way I teach ISR, because the true secret of the ISR, and my guys know it and they laugh at me, is if you see what I was doing with kids, adults, for BJJ, for MMA, for my competition team, it was ISR. Because again, it's a teaching method. It's a training method. It's a way to teach an entire group, but for the individual. So when the ISR came, it was a natural transition for me to apply the way I naturally coach and teach and do things for myself to everybody else. The challenge for me personally is that what I've always been trying to do, and it's bit me in the ass many times, because people want a leader and people want me to lead this way. People want me to move the organization this way. And part of my role is administrative, and everybody in law enforcement and military is alpha. So controlling these guys is a pain in the ass. All of you listening, you're a pain in the ass. But what they didn't see for the most part until they were years with me is all I was trying to do is just have this conversation that I've never had with anybody, because I was always nervous and afraid to have, because I feel like I wouldn't do it service. What I've always tried to do for myself, this is the selfish side, is take what I did for martial arts into two very challenging fields that nobody wanted to touch back in 95 through 2010, which is, how do I bring this to law enforcement, the most legally demanding job you can think about, because a life's in your hand and you can get sued or go to jail for the rest of your life, or ruin a community, because let's face it, the media uses this stuff to change culture. So that's that. So that was my greatest challenge. And then kids. The kids became the easiest because it was natural for me, because that was my journey as a child. You know, I've gone through all that. The police was the most difficult because I wasn't a cop. I was starting in my mid-20s. So it took me a long time. It took me, you know, a good 7 or 8 years initially. So it wasn't until 2005 that I was really rolling with it. But I've been rolling with that same ISR from 2005 till now. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed at all. What I did since 2005 was develop Clutch, which is my military system. And then I developed CAT, which was off the military system for women. That's what I've been doing since then. The stuff we're talking about now, the vertical core, that's been the same since 2005. And then the ground stuff just launched, I think, 2 years ago. So we've only done a few courses because we move slow. But that is success to me. What we're just talking about right now, that you hit the nail on the head on, is it's that system I wanted. I wanted that. And I think we've achieved it.
Yeah, from my perspective, you took the absolute best parts of what make combat sports so effective, and you created something new using those pieces to serve an audience that desperately needed it, without trying to force feed them something that wasn't fit for purpose. And I think that, and you've put it in a system that is so neatly packaged and so well designed that you can literally drop it off and train their instructors and let them have at it. You can't do that with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You can't just make someone a purple belt and say, here, go make everyone else a blue belt. That's not going to work.
I've got guys that I won't mention that took a course from me, like, you know, early on 2005. Or Paul can tell you, we have guys that came to a 2-hour, those clinics we used to do. We didn't even know we had a system yet. It was just the 9 techniques. And those guys are teaching right now, certifying people, and you watch them on YouTube, and they've gotten a nice career out of teaching the stuff we just dropped off right there. And I've had a lot of guys do courses, one course, and call it something else and run with it, because it's that easy. Now, what I see that I don't like is one course doesn't get you there as an instructor. One course will improve the survivability of the officers. So they're doing that thing we talked about earlier. They're going out there because they think they're going to do a good job. And these are good guys. There's no ill intent, but they really feel like, I got it. I'm good to go. This is amazing. I'm gonna go teach everybody. And it happens in martial arts. And that's why, as people involved in martial arts, everybody listening, you know, it's cliche, but that's the whole white belt to black belt. I'm guilty of that. You're a blue belt. You think you know it all. I'm going to learn this. I'm going to plug the guillotine into this, and then I'm going to do the foot lock. And, you know, I remember back then that my coach is looking at me like, hey, you know, we make these mistakes. So, but that's what happened with the ISR. But it did show me, wow, I'm onto something, because these guys did 40 hours and I'm watching their students and they're better than everything else I see. So I'm like, you know, so it works. But there's stages to the system itself, you know?
Yeah, I mean, my testimony to ISR was, as I was saying, like when I was using this for, when I was having to rely on physical techniques every night of the week to, to deal with real situations in nightclubs, the security training, the defensive tactics training I had previously had failed me, and I was basically just relying on wrestling and judo. After the ISR, I did 5 days with Dave and Tim. Tim came out for the first one in Australia. I immediately started applying ISR techniques that weekend, and I never really deviated. Very rarely did I actually end up going back to stuff that I had thousands more hours practicing, but because of the continual repetition at different ranges and levels of intensity over that 5 days of period, 5 days of training, those techniques just got hardwired in, and to the point where very randomly, maybe, I'm going back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was moonlighting as I took a job bouncing in a area I probably shouldn't have ever bothered, but it was good money, so what the hell. And a fight broke out, and the next thing I know, I had a guy in a wrist weave, and I was like, wow, I haven't done that in a long time. And it just kind of happened. And I was like, wow, okay, cool. That's still in there. Cool.
I got a question for you from my end. Did you get a sense of why it was taught the way it was taught? And did it give you a sense of what not to teach and why without offending you, the course?
Yeah, it did. I guess because I went into it already being quite familiar with a lot of Matt's work with the I method, etc. Like I saw a lot of those pieces fitting together really nicely. And like yourself, I've always been like an average athlete and better coach. So I kind of saw the pieces fit together, and also seeing in that particular course that we were on, there was a broad spectrum. We had some traditional martial artists, we had some people that had a little bit of grappling background, and then we had a bunch of guys that were coming from different government agencies that may or may not have had any quote unquote legit training previously. And you could see what they struggled with, and you could see what happened when they struggled, and you could see what happened when some of the egos got a little bit bruised. I remember distinctly, I might edit this bit out, maybe not, I don't know, it depends who's going to listen. But I remember distinctly there was one person on the course who was going a little bit too hard with an older member on the course, and it was really getting guys a little bit bothered. And I remember saying something to Tim about it, and I said, do you want to like pull him up and tell him to ease up a little bit? Like I could tell he'd been embarrassed on some of the other drills, and now he was overcompensating a little bit. And he said, no, it's all good, man. Usually in these sort of classes, the problem will sort itself out. And sure enough, man, by the end of day 2, that guy had well and truly had his ego put back in the box.
Right, and he didn't get hurt, which, again, when we started with BJJ and MMA, and then you had your Thai boxing time in the ring, or you had your grappling time, that doesn't finish that way. It escalates, goes different ways. So that's the uniformity. But you've brought it back to the present moment by mentioning that you came in with wrestling and judo. So that takes us back to today. So this is what I'm trying to share with people now. It's a different world than when we were trying to put this together. Every police department in the world has somebody who does BJJ or MMA or has done the work. A lot of departments have black belts. If their ego isn't in the way and they're open-minded, and I haven't found that yet, meaning because what happens is you're a police officer and you're a black belt, your ego gets in the way maybe for literally a couple of minutes, and you realize, who am I kidding? You know, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is for police. This isn't my gym. I mean, it happens instantly. If you have people in your gym that do this, I mean, in your police department that are the jiu-jitsu experts or the MMA experts, those are usually your DT guys. So those are the guys we're getting now attending the courses. So what my instructors are seeing, this is worldwide, and it makes us so happy. It's just so much easier now for us because you guys are coming in going, I've got 80 ways of doing this. And we're going to look at you and go, well, we've got one. So here goes. And then as soon as they do it, they go, oh, that's why the other 79 would work for me, but won't work for that guy because he's too small, won't work for that small female officer, won't work for that guy because he's too old and he's injured. And, oh, wow, that one won't make my chief happy. And that one won't. And they realize, oh, shit, these guys did their homework already. Let me just learn this because I can teach this very well because I am. And then their ego it's a healthy ego. Then they realize, well, I am a badass and I can really show that even better than the old man Lewis teaching it. What do I go back? And I like that because that's basically a student that would have been in my classes as a jiu-jitsu guy or an MMA guy that also joined the ISR now. That's the best of my worlds that never came together for me. My own school, I had the fighters, then I had the cops separately. You know, I teach 5-year-olds, then I teach my teenagers, then I teach my adults, my competition team, and maybe some guy who's leaving and being deployed all in the same day. I was like shifting gears all the time. So those worlds didn't meet. Now, as far as ISR, I'm all over the world is happening, but I'm seeing it too. And I go to Iceland and places like that. You got guys that have tremendous skill sets because, you know, the game evolves. These guys would have killed me given the differences as far as where they've taken this. And yet they can appreciate how simple the system is. They appreciate what the system is for. Their egos don't get rubbed like so many egos got rubbed from, 95 to 2010. They're like, thanks, cool, I'd like to help. That's what's happening with your organization now is a lot of guys are trying to reinvent it or coming in saying, let me do that. Let me do it for you. I want to be a part of this. I want to see what I could do with this. And it's a happy place, but I don't think anybody that wasn't there appreciates the journey. It's just the way it is, That's just the way it is.
Man, we could talk for hours more about this, but I'll be respectful of your time. If people want to, organizations want to book you, they want to reach out and learn more or engage your services in some way, how can they get in touch with you?
There's several ways. ISR Matrix is very popular. If you just do the Google search, it'll take you to our website, isrmatrix.com or .org. It'll take you to our Instagram, our YouTube page. I prefer that they go to the YouTube page and the website. That way they get the text and they get the actual visuals so they could see that. That's probably the best way. You have emails there available to get a hold of me. I'm in a position now where I'm passing on a lot of the work. I want to focus on working on coaching coaches, but I'd love to get that new generation of guys that have been overseas and police officers that have grown up in this industry, meaning mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu, to check out what we're doing to see if it's a shortcut to getting them where they want to be or their passions are. I'm 54 right now when this interview is being done, and I'm not going to be doing this much longer as far as getting my hands in the mix. In fact, I don't do it much anymore. I have a beautiful group of guys and women behind me doing it. And I'd like to get more people involved, because when I say that, I start thinking about it, they're in their 40s. So it's not like, we need the new bloods. So, but yeah, I'd like to get that going, and they can contact me through those means.
Awesome. All right, Lewis, thank you very much. You go hang around and do the bonus questions for our Patreon contributors. But for everyone else who's leaving us now, I just want to thank you very much for sharing your journey. This is Lewis' first ever podcast interview. I'm very honored that he chose the Managing Violence podcast to do it and to get the story out there. So thank you again, Lewis, and stay tuned, everyone else, for the bonus round.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to Lewis Gutierrez of ISR Matrix, and thank you for listening for Season 5 as we come to a close. We are now 50 official episodes, plus a few bonus episodes deep into this journey. And the podcast keeps going from strength to strength. The feedback I'm getting is tremendous. Our supporters are growing over on the Patreon. The conversations are growing in the Managing Violence tribe on Facebook. Please keep in touch with everything we do. Patreon.com/Managing Violence. Facebook.com something Managing Violence. Managing Violence Tribe is the Facebook community. We are everywhere. My website is www.joesaunders.com.au, and we will be back for Managing Violence Podcast Season 6 on the 20th of July. July 20 will be Episode 1 of Season 6. Until then, thank you for your support. Stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you next time.